This report is on PTSD in law enforcement. Post-traumatic stress in law enforcement is a subject which we rarely speak of in law enforcement, today and in the past. When you hear post-traumatic stress disorder, most people think of soldiers who are trying to adapt back to their life and in the civilian world, not coping with the ghosts of their experiences. Yet studies have shown that police officers suffer symptoms indicative of post-traumatic stress disorder at a similar rate as veterans from the military. Between 7 and 19% of police officers exhibit symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder compared to 3.5% of the general public. We can all relate to post-traumatic stress in our personal lives, but more than ever on the job. If you are a longtime veteran of law enforcement, there are so many things you've already seen, touched, smelled, experienced in your tour of duty that will affect your life without whether you admit it or not. If you're not at a high level in law enforcement, if you are at a high level of law enforcement, such as chief, assistant chief, training directors, or oversee officers in the field, you can be the one to implement new changes in your policy. This will combat post-traumatic stress disorder. For the officers who are just starting or still on the job, or still new to the job, post-traumatic stress is a real issue to be aware of and will be a big part of your career. Just as we train in firearms, driving, and arrest techniques, we also need mandatory training on post-traumatic stress awareness and treatment. This way we can make it to retirement as well as surviving retirement. We all may think that we only have to deal with post-traumatic stress during our 30 years of service, but sometimes so many little events through the years can come to light during retirement. So we need to be aware of these issues, and we need to prepare for post-traumatic stress disorder and be ready to treat symptoms as they arise. The local police department is no different than any big city police departments when it comes to post-traumatic stress. A psychologist spoke of law enforcement officers when he said they see abused kids, they see dead bodies, they see horrific traffic accidents, and what that means is that traumatic events and stressful kind build upon one another. If you have to put a bulletproof vest on before you go to work, that's an indication that you're already under the possibility of being shot or killed. So all these things weigh heavily on the psyche, and over time they hurt the officers. The purpose of this report is to bring awareness to the subject of post-traumatic stress in law enforcement. If every officer in our department understands what post-traumatic stress is, understands the history of post-traumatic stress, and can recognize underlying causes, recognize signs and triggers, and know the treatment options for post-traumatic stress, we can make the local police department an even better place not only to work but to thrive. With the recent passing of a former chief, we all had a rude awakening of how it affected everyone's daily work. With this new class, we can assure our men and women in the local police department has what they need to survive what we experience every day of our duties as law enforcement officers. This report explores not only how officers can recognize the signs of post-traumatic stress in his or her own lives, but it can also be beneficial in recognizing post-traumatic stress in other officers as well. This can mean the difference in getting help early or wondering why the officer did what they did after the fact when it's too late to take back the actions the officer has done. So let's define post-traumatic stress. It's a psychological reaction occurring after experiencing a highly event such as wartime, combat, physical violence, or natural disaster that is usually characterized by depression, anxiety, flashbacks, recurrent nightmares, avoidance of reminders of the event. So some of the signs officers should always be on the lookout for in themselves and as well as other officers around them. Officers can experience fatigue, vomiting, nausea, chest pains, twitching, thirst, insomnia or nightmares, grinding of teeth, profuse sweating, pounding of the chest, upset stomach, and headaches. Some of the signs you need to be looking at while you're home is important too. Officers do not hang their PTSD up at the office before they go home. Officers tend to experience PTSD at home as well. An officer may experience restlessness, pacing, have emotional outbursts, becomes antisocial, and bouts of suspicion and paranoia. Officers can also increase alcohol consumption and commit other substance abuse. There's also emotional signs. Officers show emotional signs for PTSD, and they can exhibit anxiety or panic, guilt, fear, denial, irritability, depression, intense anger, agitation, and apprehension. There are many ways an officer can get help for PTSD. They just have to take the first step in asking for it. Officers need to use their chain of command and remember their chain of command has been through some of the same things, same issues, and some of the same events which the officer is currently going through. Locust Police Department needs to check the policy and may need to write a policy for traumatic events, PTSD, and mandatory counseling after such events to combat post-traumatic stress disorder. In conclusion, it is the responsibility of Locust Police Department and every member of the law enforcement community, as well as the individual officer, to take a close look at post-traumatic stress disorder in today's law enforcement. All officers understand and have heard the term, "I got your six." With all the things an officer sees and can't unsee, breaking this stereotype and getting help an officer needs is a must. The help is out there, and we need to look out for the new guy, look out for the veteran on the force, along with our retired officers. One small occurrence can add up to a mountain of stress over 30 years of an officer's career. By implementing the following recommendations based on the conclusions of this report, Locust Police Department will be able to understand post-traumatic stress in its law enforcement officers, recognize the signs and symptoms of post-traumatic stress, and provide officers with clear and precise guidance for dealing with the traumatic events as they occurred, and the treatment options and or requirements after such events. This will ensure good, healthy officers with the City of Locust and the Locust Police Department for years to come.